Carving pumpkins was always one of my favorite Halloween traditions, but did you know that jack-o'-lanterns are actually based on a man who angered both God and the devil? The story has its origins in Irish folklore, and it goes something like this. Once there was a man called Jack, and he was known as the stingiest of them all. Along with being stingy, he also thought himself quite clever. One day, he invited the devil out for a drink. When it came time to pay, he told the devil to turn himself into a coin so that he may use it to cover the amount. However, the moment the devil obliged, Jack slipped the coin into a sack of money which also contained a cross so that he couldn't turn back to his original form. The devil, forced to remain there, grew angry, and Jack refused to release him because he was afraid of what would happen. When he finally did decide to release him, he did so on the condition that the devil would not come to claim his soul for 1 whole year. So, the devil kept his promise. He went back to hell and bided his time. He waited until exactly 1 year later when he showed up again, but this time Jack was ready. He tricked the devil once more, this time into climbing a tall tree to pick a fruit. The moment the devil climbed up, quick as a flash, Jack ran forward and carved a cross into the trunk, and once again the devil was trapped. This second time, Jack made the devil promise not to claim his soul for 10 more years. Fuming at being tricked but helpless to do anything except agree, once more the devil agreed to his terms and went back to hell to wait. However, when Jack died, the 10 years were not up yet. He went first to the gates of heaven, but God, having seen all that he did, refused to let such a person in. So Jack made his way to hell. However, when he got there, the devil refused to let him in as well. He told him that he must uphold the promise he made and that he could not claim Jack's soul. Drooping his shoulders, Jack realized what he had done. He was no longer alive, but he could not find peace and instead was stuck in an in-between. As he turned away from the gates of hell, the devil, taking pity on him, threw him 1 piece of coal from hell. And so, Jack came back up to earth, punished to wander, not alive, but almost like a ghost. He carved out a turnip and put the piece of coal inside, and so started his exile. Occasionally, people would see his light in the forest, and so he got the name Jack of the Lantern, which eventually shortened to jack-o'-lantern. This is a cheesy pumpkin pasta, easy to make in large quantities, and sure to be a crowd pleaser for potlucks and parties. Do you know why the vampire from Sesame Street was obsessed with counting? I'll give you a hint. It's not just because his name was Count Von Count. His love of counting is actually based in mythology. According to legend, vampires have something called arithmomania, which, as you might be able to guess, is the obsessive need to count everything. So, in order to ward off vampires, people all throughout Europe and Asia would pour poppy seeds, sand, rice, and anything else they could think of on top of graves and in front of their doors, thinking that if vampires did decide to come to them in the cover of darkness, they would be forced to stop and count every last grain in the pile. And by the time they had finished, the sun would have risen and the vampire would be forced to flee or die. But where did the idea of vampires even come from? The truth is that almost every nation and kingdom has had some legend that is tied to an evil being that drinks blood. Pottery shards from ancient Persia showed depictions of blood-drinking creatures, and Indian legends tell of creatures called betal, which sleep upside down like bats. Greek mythology speaks of Empusa, daughter of Hecate, who would seduce men, then drink their blood. Legends of vampires in Europe are most similar to the vampires we know today. Irish myths tell of Avartok, an evil tyrant who was killed but kept escaping his grave to drink people's blood. But what really made vampires what they are today are books. One of the most famous vampire authors was Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula in 1897. His Count Dracula was weakened by sunlight and killed by a wooden stake. However, soon vampires went from villains to tragic heroes, as shown by Anne Rice in her book Interview with a Vampire. And of course, I can't not mention Twilight. Now, when it comes to food, aside from drinking blood and fearing sunlight, another thing that people associate vampires with is garlic. Famously, vampires cannot eat garlic, and so to ward them off, people would wear necklaces of garlic or dangle cloves of it on their front doors. Today, I made garlic knots, and now when you want to eat these, you can just say you're warding off vampires. Of course, these were so good. The ancient Celtic people celebrated the 31st of October not as Halloween, but as the last day of the year. It was known as the festival of Samhain. According to legend, one day a year on the night of the 31st, spirits and other supernatural beings had free reign to roam the earth. To honor their ancestors, people would build altars, light bonfires and candles, and give food offerings, particularly apples, to the dead. And in order to ward off the potentially evil spirits that might visit, they would also play various games and participate in traditions. Actually, one of those was carving pumpkins and turnips and placing candles inside, similar to a jack-o'-lantern, and another involved burning piles of nuts and stacking wheat, but there was an interesting one that surprisingly had to do with kale, and it was more of a fortune-telling one. The towns would round up all of the eligible men and women of marrying age and cover their eyes with a cloth, then thrust them into a field of kale. The bachelors and bachelorettes would have to wander around until they found a stalk of kale. Once they had chosen their plant, they would pull it up, then bring it back to be analyzed. But what was the point? Well, the kale they picked would supposedly determine the traits of their future husbands and wives. For example, if the plant they chose was tall and healthy, so would their partner be, and the more dirt on the plant, the richer they would be as well. But there is someone else who has created an iconic character of Halloween who also had a love for kale. I am talking about Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. According to letters that she wrote, kale was one of her favorite foods and she frequently cooked it for herself and her loved ones. When Mary was only 16, she ran off to France with her soon-to-be husband, the poet Percy Shelley, and her stepsister, and after a few months of debauchery, returned to England when they ran out of money. She wrote her first draft of Frankenstein in 1816 when she was just 18 years old, and fun fact, she actually wrote it as a bet. She published it 2 years later, anonymously at first. Today, I made a stewed kale and egg toast. This does take a bit of time to make as the broth needs to be cooked down, but the end result is so worth it because it removes the bitterness from the kale. This has been some Halloween menu items and stories to go along with them. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye, and happy Halloween!